Hi, my name is Malaysia Knowles, and the title of my research paper is Humans in Science, The Relationship Unraveled. And specifically, what I want to focus on is how the uncanny is relative to humans in science. I'm mainly focusing on how the uncanny is imperative to human and scientific progression, and how the integration of clones in technology is used to depict that. The general definition of uncanny is that it relates to something that is mysterious, strange, and unfamiliar, and it's usually associated with supernatural elements. But depending on its context, it could also mean careless, unreliable, incautious, and not trustworthy. But the definition that I'm mainly focusing on is unfamiliarity. Uncanniness is depicted in Never Let Me Go through the idea that although clones are direct copies of humans, they lack the entitlement of being portrayed as humans. It's as if there are necessary conditions to being human, and they don't meet the criteria because 1. They are artificial beings and their creation requires human intervention. 2. Reproduction. But reproduction is kind of controversial because there are humans that can't reproduce, but that causes them to be considered as the other, similar to how clones are considered to be the other. And lastly, emotions. The clones are able to clearly express their emotions and they are faced with different dilemmas, and that adds to their humanity, and that should be considered as a factor in determining whether or not they are human, but of course that gets disregarded. In Harvest, I want to focus on the uncanniness of technology and the concept of the familiar becoming unfamiliar. And that's basically a idea that I adopted from Freud. But nevertheless, technology is something that we have grown accustomed to, although it's always evolving. But in Harvest, you see a transition from technology becoming too advanced to the point where it's uncontrollable, and where individuals, or in this case the receivers, are using technology as a way to control what is projected as being realistic, and that's seen as a form of basically manipulation. My first source is The Uncanny by Sigmund Freud. The uncanny can be defined as being something that is unfamiliar or hidden. And I want to reintroduce the idea of the familiar transitioning to the unfamiliar because that is something that evokes fear in us. And Freud indicates that fear is something that is a part of the human experience. The next source is New Bodies, New Identities, the negotiation of cloning technologies and young adult fiction. And in this source, clones are depicted in fictional mediums, and they are utilized as replaceable agents to invest in the prolongation of human life. And it basically explores the ethical responsibility that is attached to cloning because of the adaptations that clones have to undergo. And the last source is Morality in the Technological World, Knowledge as Duty, and it's basically reducing the value of humans so that they can reconsider things that they deem as being insignificant. And it causes them to reevaluate what they consider to be invaluable and what they consider to be valuable. The first question that I have is how can the uncanny be utilized to define human and scientific progression? And I want to focus on Never Let Me Go for this question because it talks about a lot about the relationship between clones and humans, and how although clones are considered to be uncanny, they are still imperative to the survival of the human race. And they are imperative to scientific progression too. The second question I have is, since technology is presented as being necessary for scientific progression, can it be uncanny in the sense it becomes too surreal or too advanced? And I'll focus on Harvest for this question because in Harvest, technology does become too realistic or too advanced to the point where there are humans who live in these pods where that provide all the necessities that that individual needs, but they're kind of it kind of shuts that individual out from the outside world. And the third question I have is how is the uncanniness of how is the uncanniness of science and technology comparative? Is the uncanniness of technology a myth since its purpose is to evolve? And I want to consider this question because technology is, like I mentioned before, technology is something that always evolves. And with evolution also comes unfamiliarity. So that's what I want to compare to uncanniness.